Hear these words from Jeremiah, the 17th chapter. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. They shall be like a tree planted by water, sending out its roots by the stream. It shall not fear when heat comes, its leaves shall stay green. In the year of drought it is not anxious, and it does not cease to bear fruit. Okay, so Earl was a really special person in my life, as well as all of you here who are gathered. And I guess before I'm going to try to review some of the things the family and I have talked about over time, but one of the things I just so appreciated about Earl is he moved when he was 90 years old and started over. Just think about that for a moment. I know people in their 40s and 50s and 60s who, when they have to make a big move for whatever reason, you know, to downsize the house or move where the kids are or whatever reason, it's almost as if they stop their lives. But for Earl, every single day was a new day. And there might be somebody new that he hadn't talked to, who might have a story to share or an interest that they might be able to share together. And I think that's an amazing, amazing gift to be around somebody like that who always had room for one more person. What a gift it is to be able to share in that life with us. Well, Earl was born in October of 1910. Next week he would have been 104 years old. His dad died when he was 10 and his mother remarried. Earl was a graduate of Rollins High School in 1929 and until now, making him the oldest surviving member of his class and the first class to graduate from the new high school on Buffalo Street. And Kay says, and I know because he told me this, during his high school years he was busy with sports and girls. He always had that really great head of hair, and I think he really enjoyed razzing his brother when he lost his. And of course there's something about a guy with that thick white hair that granddaughter was totally right. The women just were really drawn to him. And I won't say any names or any places where that might have happened, but I just know that would be true. He had a variety of jobs, but worked for 40 years for the railroad. It became one of the passions of his life. And another thing about Earl was that he was a lifelong learner. Not only did he know everything there was to know really about the railroads and would collect different things about railroads and the calendars and the memorabilia, and boy was he a collector. I can't even imagine. It's a good thing they moved every once in a while. Because when they moved from Rollins to Utah, they took about a ton of stones and rocks and gems with them, leaving a lot behind. Plural tons. Yes, how many tons? Do you remember? Seven. I remember him describing it as a boxcar load. So I imagine that downsize, and Dorothy must have been a saint, because I can't imagine a hobby that takes up as much room as block. But besides the rock collecting, he also collected coins, he collected stamps, but I think Kay and I decided that maybe that was more Mom's hobby, because at one point after Dorothy had passed away, he actually started using the stamps in his collection. So I'm sure that the post office got a little excited when they saw some of those stamps. They loved to travel. He and Dorothy were of the love of each other's lives. They were married for over 65 years. And although I never got to be with Dorothy, the stories that he told and the pictures that he showed me just spoke volumes of that great love they had together. They loved to travel. When Earl was 17, which I thought was just an amazing thing for a high school boy, he made a scrapbook of his final year in high school. And the family still has it, but some of the pictures you saw were from that scrapbook. And then when he retired, he began that hobby again of making a scrapbook every year. So they have a stack of scrapbooks about yay high, tons, yes. And they're wonderful. They have pictures and postcards and places they went and cards they received from friends and family. And he just kept that as like a living journal of their adventures together. They're always up for a new adventure. If Kay wanted to invite them to a trip or a hike or whatever, they're just always ready and willing to go. It was just kind of an amazing thing. I can't remember all of the different things he collected, but he was also an avid reader. Loved to, and the swizzle sticks. I forgot. How could I forget the swizzle sticks? Those are easier to store than the rocks. Yes. Yes, he had the swizzle sticks, and he also made somewhere around 365 bolo ties, one for each day of the year. And those were amazing. And Dorothy was always his best customer in making his jewelry. It began sort of as hobbies do. They sort of start accidentally. Well, he had a friend in Rawlins that collected Indian arrowheads. And he was really fascinated by that because this guy would collect them and then put them up on boards. And so Earl began with that. But then, there's a lot of nothing in Rawlins. I've been there. And so as he would go out and walk looking for arrowheads, he noticed these other things, and he began to pick up rocks and things that he would discover, and then would study about them. And he became a very avid amateur geologist. And then from that, once they built their house and there was room for it, he was able to have his rock shop, and he could do the polishing, and he could do the lapidary, and it became a lifelong hobby and also just a joy in his life. And Dorothy was always ready to fashion some of the things that he made for her. He also collected rocks when he went on some of his trips. When he was 100, he made little cards with different samples of rocks on them, so that when people would come and visit the rock shop on his birthday, that they could see some of his work. So I can't even imagine how many hours that must have taken him to do those.
So we have those here.
And those are here.
For people to take, so I don't have to take them home.
That's right. For a limited time only, you too may have a sample rock from Earl's.
And one of the things, the stepping stones.
And yes, that was the next thing I was going to say. The stepping stones were, I think, they were your idea, weren't they, Kay? Because when they got to come and live with Kay here in Montana, literally around his shop, if you've ever been out there, the shop is just surrounded by bucket after bucket after bucket of these rocks, all sorted, all labeled, and then inside was a whole other story too. We had everything labeled and beautifully done. Well, Kay thought that maybe there might be a way to use some of those and display them. So it was Dad's idea?
When Mom died.
When Mom died, okay. So they had all of these stones, and so they began to make stepping stones that they used to surround the pond out at their place and to make the wall around the garden. And they're just beautiful, and they're such a work of love. And took many, many, many hours of labor.
Close to 400.
Close to 400 stepping stones.
20 pounds each.
That weigh 20 pounds each, so you can do the math there. I wanted to share some of my favorite stories about Earl, and I'm really fascinated now because the words I think of when I think of Earl are, the humor and the kindness and the gentleness, and then I found out about this card playing personality. I had no idea, because whenever he was, it's a good thing I never challenged him to a game of cards, or I'd have a whole other, I just don't know. But whenever I would go to see Earl, he would be so delighted, and I know that all of you as friends, as you've come through the years to go visit him, whether it was at home or playing cards or whatever, his face would just light up. And it would just make you feel like the most important person in the world, because you walk in the door and his face just lit up. And then he would always thank you for coming to see him. And when I would come to visit, he usually had something baked. He'd been baking in the morning, he had some bread or some cookies or something, and we'd sit down and have a cup of tea and something that he had baked. And I was the recipient of some of those Christmas cards. They're about this big, so they kind of had to be hand-delivered. But they always had very beautiful words on them, and their eyelids handmade, and his calligraphy was on it. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing. One of the things that really tickled me on his 100th birthday was that the whole family was involved in getting the displays ready and getting the food ready. And then one of the grandsons, the great-grandsons or nephews or whomever, were making name tags for everybody as they came in. And so the name tags of the family members were like Earl's daughter, and then the name, and Earl's nephew, and the name. So everybody, when you would come to have food, you'd see who was there and how they belonged to Earl. Well, I walked in, and my name tag said Earl's pastor. I saved that for weeks. So I just love that designation that I was Earl's pastor. He was somebody who always had, Dorothy always would say that he never knew a stranger, and so she didn't ever know who he was going to bring home next, because he'd be visiting a hardware store or whatever, and they'd get into a really good conversation, and he'd just bring him home. So it's just an amazing, open, loving thing that he would do. One of my favorite memories of Earl was that one year when I was thinking about what I wanted to do in terms of a sermon series in the fall, I was thinking about, I wonder if there's a way that I could include Earl's rock tumbling in that, because he showed me around the shop and showed me how it worked and all that, and he gave me a rock tumbler. So I sat down with Earl, and he explained how it all worked, and he gave me some sample rocks. And so for children's time, for about 2 months, every week we would look again at the rocks. They got to pick their rock, and Earl would explain something about the rocks, and then the tumbling process takes quite a while. And at the end of the several weeks that we did this, each of the kids had this beautiful shiny stone, and somebody in the congregation actually set the stones for them so that they could wear them. But the thing that really struck me was, and I think it's one of the things that Earl knew just instinctively, is when he was explaining to me how you put the rocks in the tumbler, it was totally against what I would have thought or intuited about how rocks would be able to become shiny when you're tumbling them around in a tumbler. Because to me it would seem like you'd want about the same size and shape and about the same hardness. But he said, no, you want them to be different sizes and different hardnesses and different shapes, and then gradually you start out with very coarse sand, and eventually get finer and finer and finer sand. And so as a pastor, as we were going through this process together, week after week, I realized that is an amazing metaphor for what it means to be the people of God. Because we're all these different sizes and shapes. We're all these different kinds of personalities. We all have challenges to face, and we all can get cranky with each other and bump up against each other. And yet that process of tumbling all of these things together really brings out the inner beauty of the stones, certainly, but also as the people of God. And not too long after that, I think it was, I can't remember which birthday it was. It was around birthday time again. We had this big birthday party on a Saturday, and I really didn't expect to see Earl in church. But sure enough, he was here. And I noticed he was wearing these really bright, Hazel was reminding me of this story, he was wearing these really bright orange athletic shoes. I mean, they were sharp. And he had a new walking suit on. Yes, it was the Bronco shoe. I mean, he looked really great. So I was just, and he always had over there. So I said, oh, Earl, those are great shoes. And without even a second thought, he took hold of the back of the pew and he put his leg up on top of the back of the pew. He was over 100 years old. And everybody went, oh. And he just sat back down. Another one of the projects that they had not too many years ago was when Kay and Earl decided to do a seeing eye care animal, and they brought Amos to church. So every week we were able to have Amos in our church services and watch as he grew up and became this really amazingly well-behaved dog. And they missed him so much when they had to give him up, that then they decided to get this dog. And I was so excited to know that they were going to name your dog Abby, because I like NCIS. And who knew that this centenarian would like something like NCIS? I had this sudden bond that we were watching the same TV show on Tuesday nights. It's just kind of an amazing thing. But it's a wonderful to be able to be touched by a life as deep and as rich and as full as Earl. And I think if most of us were to live 200 years, we couldn't fit in nearly as much as Earl did in 100. But as we close this morning, I just wanted to say that I think that probably one of the biggest gifts that any of us can give in our lives to each other, to be received from one another and also to be given, is the openness and the vulnerability and the risk-taking to keep letting new adventures, new people, new experiences, new things to learn. Not only does it just keep us healthy and active, but it also just makes us amazingly wise human beings. And although Earl is greatly missed by all of us, we have an amazing legacy from Earl that we are able to share together, and hopefully we'll emulate. I hope that I get to be like Earl when I'm grown up. So now I'm going to sing the song that Kate was